Well, good morning, everyone. Wow, it's so beautiful to see this room full, and I hope we can do this again and again. Thank you for joining us today for yet another great program brought to you by the Midday Rotary Club of San Miguel de Allende. And to those of you that are visitors here today, please know that all you need to do is talk to one of us that's a member and find out more how you can be a part of this great team. But today it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. James Creechan, who is here again to provide us with insight about Mexican cartels. He is a Canadian retired sociologist who taught and engaged in criminological research for 3 decades at the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Canada. He earned a PhD in sociology at the University of Arizona, where he focused on juvenile delinquency and crime along the southwest border. He has held visiting and adjunct professional professorships at the University of Toronto, McMaster University, Queen's University, and the University of Guelph. Between 1998 and 2012, Dr. Creechan was a member of the Faculty of International Studies and Public Policy at the Autonomous University in Sinaloa in Culiacan, Mexico, where he also served as founding professor of an MA program in the US and Canadian studies. Now retired in Toronto, he continues to mentor students and most recently published a critical history of Mexican drug cartels titled Drug Wars and Covert Netherlands, the Transformation of Mexico's Drug Cartels. And of course, this is why we're all here today. He is a contributor to several websites sharing information on Mexico and organized crime. He created a Facebook group called Mexico Watch, which is a source of current information and news about crime, narco traffic, and Mexican politics. So without further ado, please help me welcome our good friend, Dr. James Creechan, who is on Zoom.
Hello there. I got a general topic for today. I'll just talk about the undoing of the Mexican policy on security that President AMLO Lopez Obrador called abrazos, no balazos. And there's all kinds of turmoil going on around it right now, especially in the first week of October. So let's take a look at what's happened just in the first 10 days or so of this month. There's a list here of various things. The Mexican military servers were hacked, and about 60 million files were released by a hacking group called Guacamaya Group. Okay, and this has caused great consternation and disruption. The military in Mexico is now fully in control of security. The Guardia Nacional, which was a police force that was in fact created to provide some civilian oversight, has now been returned to the military, and the military will be fully in control of that through 2028. In the beginning part of October, there were roadblocks in the Northwest, and most recently, in the past few days, there was a massacre in the mayoralty office of Totolapan in Guerrero, and 20 people were killed, including the mayor. There's been all kinds of things in the news about corruption. There's a warrant been issued against the outgoing governor of Tamaulipas, Governor Cabeza de Vaca. Several other governors have been accused of having narco links and have been exposed in the press, mainly through the Sedena hacks that have happened. The government of Lopez Obrador continues to issue attacks on the press and criticize people who are opposed to his policy of security and just generally opposed to anything he's doing. Okay, so they're continuing. And those attacks on the press have even included the use of spyware, Israeli spyware called Pegasus, which was installed surreptitiously on phones of several reporters, and that's come to light. And as most people know, the homicide rates in Mexico consider at an unacceptably high level. Okay, and to top it all off, there's now cabinet instability, okay, in particular around the free trade agreement, where the Secretary of Economy actually resigned in the middle of negotiations with Canada and Mexico over energy rights. So anyway, all these things have been going on, and it's been a very disruptive kind of month. So what am I going to talk about today? Okay, there are several things I can talk about, but I'm good. And I'll talk about the first two I mentioned here. And if people in the room or online have questions, I'd be happy to address the last three. Okay, the first thing I'm going to talk about are the cartels, the cartel turf wars, and what they are, and give an overview again of who's involved and what's going on. We'll take a little bit of a look at violence in Mexico with a focus on Guanajuato State, and in particular, because I think that's what most people might be interested on. And I'll very briefly mention the issue of the militarization of security and the removal of almost all attempts to control cartels from civil forces. I will also take a very fast look at a whole debate around something called preventive imprisonment, okay, and the challenges that it has had for human rights. And finally, of course, we'll take a very fast look at the Serena leaks. But as I said, the first two things on my list here are really what I'll talk about, because that's going to be almost all the time that really will be available before I bore everybody to death with too many facts. So, okay, what about the cartels? Okay, there's one thing I want to say in general to begin with here. Most people in the public, okay, and in fact in the U.S. military, in the U.S. Department of Justice rather, tend to think of the cartels as drug organizations, okay? But it's very important to point out that it's much more than just drugs. A Mexican scholar who teaches in the U.S. by the name of Guadalupe Correa has pointed out very clearly that what's going on with the cartels is it's a war of resources. Okay, the cartels are fighting to control many, many different kinds of commodities in Mexico. Okay, what kinds of commodities? Well, the avocado industry, the lime industry. Okay, but the oil and gas industry, the almost anything related to commodities that can be exported. The most recent one that's come under great competition between cartels is the competition for control of lithium mining. Okay, lithium, of course, is a very important mineral. That's a necessity for almost all the electronic gadgets that we are using, computers, iPhones. And Mexico is one of the few places in the world that has a large resource of lithium available to be mined, and the cartels are mixed right into that. So anyway, again, to just emphasize that the cartels are not just about drugs. Of course, that remains very important, and they're clearly shipping fentanyl into the U.S. and all kinds of other drugs, but all these other things are involved, and because all those other resources are involved, the whole issue becomes very complicated. Okay, so let's move on. You guys hopefully can see all of this. The American government, Department of Justice in particular, and the DEA still recognizes the following cartels in Mexico. Okay, there are, I think, nine of them or so on here. There might be 10. The two largest, though, are the Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, and that one is going to be of particular interest to Guanajuato, Michoacan, Zacatecas, people in the middle, because that's where they are the dominant forces in the middle of the country. The second largest cartel, and the mother of all cartels basically, is the Sinaloa cartel. And it's still very powerful. And in fact, the Cartel de Jalisco and the Cartel de Sinaloa are major competitors and in fighting for control of the resources and the drug industry that I mentioned before. There are still older cartels around, like the Gulf Cartel, which dominates the East Coast, Tamaulipas down, or the older remnants of the Beltran-Leyva organization in Tijuana. Okay, the Zetas, a very violent paramilitary group, still exists and is in control of areas like in Tabasco and in Veracruz, areas around there. And then there are other fragments of groups like whose names have appeared in the press, like the Viagras, the Familia Michoacana, the Rojos, who are involved in the Ayotzinapa and the missing 43 students. Okay, so anyway, but the two major cartels are the Cartel de Jalisco and the Nueva Generación. Now, the United States Homeland Security has also pointed out that there are many parts of Mexico where some states, like some groups like the Cartel de Jalisco, have absolute dominance, okay? And that's going to be down in the Jalisco, okay, Colima, Nayarit, and reaching into even areas like Guanajuato state. And the Sinaloa cartel basically is going to be controlling areas out of Sinaloa into Durango and north, but they also have a very strong presence down in the Yucatan. And these cartels, when they come in competition with each other, some states in particular are going to be, the focus of their plaza wars. I won't spend a lot of time talking about it, but excuse me. For many years, it's that power of the struggle between the Cartel de Jalisco, Nueva Generación, and the Sinaloa cartel has long been known. But at the moment, it really has come down to a battle between the Sinaloa cartel and the Cartel de Jalisco. Now, much about them has been known, but there's some new research that's come out that's kind of given an overview of how these two cartels operate and how they're different from each other. So I'm going to show a couple of graphics here that'll probably, when you first look at them, they'll probably go like, what the hell is on this list? But I'll try to explain why I've got them up there. Okay, so the first one we're going to take a look at is the Sinaloa cartel. Okay, and the Sinaloa cartel is obviously centered out of the state of Sinaloa, and in particular, the area around Culiacan and Mazatlan. But it has a working relationship with all kinds of other groups that have been identified and whose name has appeared in the press at various times, all across Mexico. But the thing that this graphic is trying to illustrate from research is that the Cartel de Sinaloa has a very interesting working relationship with all of these other groups. It's not a one-way, top-down kind of power-directed organization that orders all these other groups to do things. It actually cooperates with them. And those other groups, in fact, cooperate with other groups and have links that where they do business with each other outside of the domain or overview of the leaders of the cartel de Sinaloa. So the relationship of all these groups to the Sinaloa cartel is what's called horizontal and cooperative, and they're involved in almost everything. Okay, as I said earlier, the control of avocado distribution, control of lime, even things like the manufacture of bullets in Mexico, which are then shipped back into the United States. Okay, so the Sinaloa cartel has this kind of structure that's very cooperative. It's very vague. It has connections to higher ups in government, and it continues to be powerful, and it has remained powerful since at least the 1960s and even further back in time. Now, on the other hand, the cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación is a very different kind of cartel. It's very much a top-down organization, and its purpose and its goals, and it's, I guess, an organizational mandate, has been to take all of these other groups and make them part of the structure, and the bosses at the top order them and work with them, okay, basically in an authoritarian kind of way. And the cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación is a little bit different than the Sinaloa cartel because it began really in the distribution of synthetic drugs, as opposed to things like marijuana, okay, and opium and cocaine, the manufacture of fentanyl. But it very quickly got into the desire to control other kinds of resources, like the oil and gas industry, okay, and any kind of a commodity that's going to be exported to the U.S. or Canada or elsewhere in the world. And anyway, this diagram, as I said, is a little bit complicated to look at, but what you'll note here are the absence of connecting arrows between these groups. All orders come from the top, and it goes from the top down. Okay, now in the state of Guanajuato, there's a smaller organizational group that came under attack by the cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, and that is the cartel de Santa Rosa de Lima, which had its own organizational structure, and it incorporated groups that some of you in Guanajuato may have seen in the newspaper, like Los Marros, Los Antrax, Los Búfalos, Los Cabras, Cartels Unidos. But the cartel, the Santa Rosa de Lima, was seen as the major competition of the cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación. And the mandate, the purpose of the cartel de Jalisco, of course, is to bring all these groups under its wing, and it directly attacked the leaders of the cartel de Santa Rosa. Okay, so the result, of course, has been violence. And so let's talk about violence for a minute. And in particular, what are called homicidio dolosos, intentional homicide. As everybody knows, Mexico continues to have a high rate of murder. The expectation is that there are going to be, again, about 35,000 homicides, homicidios dolosos, this year in Mexico. In comparison to Canada and the United States, okay, as a reference point, that translates into a rate of about 25 intentional murders per 100,000 people. The United States, the average sits around 8. In Canada, the average sits around 1.6 per 100,000. So you can see, the major concern are the number of homicides. Not all those homicides are related to cartel violence and cartel wars. A very reasonable estimate across the country is that at least 60% of the homicides in Mexico are related to the violence related to cartels. Either the cartel fights directly amongst themselves, or the culture that it generates, where violence has become acceptable and everybody's armed, and the way to resolve disputes is to kill somebody. But the latest data, let's get a little bit more specific here. The latest data indicates that the 6 most violent states, okay, at the present time in Mexico are Michoacan, number 1, Guanajuato, number 2, Mexico State, number 3, Baja California, number 4, Jalisco, number 5, and Sonora, number 6. Those 6 states are contributing 1/2 of all the homicides that were recorded last year by INAHE. Okay, and essentially that's 18,000 murders that are found in those 6 states. Okay, so some states are less violent than others, and some much less violent than others, but these are the 6 most violent states, and much of it is related to cartel violence and the fight over drugs and the fight over control of resources. Okay, I found a graphic from 2020, okay, that makes this picture of violence a lot more specific. And this graphic has got the 10 most violent cities in Mexico in 2020, both in terms of the absolute number of homicides, the total number of people killed, and the rate. Okay, so the most violent city, let's look at them because 2 of them are in Guanajuato. Okay, Tijuana is the most violent city in 2020, followed by Ciudad Juarez. And of course, those 2 cities get a lot of the press, and the press pays a lot of attention to those 2 cities because of the location on the border. But the 3rd most violent city and the 4th most violent city are both in Guanajuato, León and Celaya. And Culiacan still sits up there, as does Sonora, Cajeme in southern Sonora, and Zamora, to finish it off, Acapulco, and the community of Benito Juarez. Okay, those are the 10 most violent cities. And the ones, of course, are concerned to people in the state of Guanajuato are León and Celaya. Okay, and I got another way of kind of looking at this. The 2 graphics I'm going to show you here. The first one is just the pattern of homicide over time, going back to about 2018, and by month. And of course, it shows that the level of violence in the state of Guanajuato does vary by months, and it peaked at 462 back in December of 2019. Then it dropped. It's gone continually down, but it's now through the first 3 months of this year, or 9 months of this year, it's sitting at about 300 homicides. Let's take a look at some things to kind of reassure you. I'm going to pick. I hope this opens up quickly. Okay, it's a link to a local
Jim,
report. Yeah.
Jim, can you give us a second? We're going to allow you to connect so that you can share screen. Give us a moment. So you're able to share the screen if you do what you need to do on your end, because we're not seeing anything on this end.
You're not seeing anything at all there?
No. So please go ahead and yeah. Yes. You can screen share, right, Jim?
I can see.
You're the host. You can screen share with us. You're the host. You can screen share.
Okay.
Go ahead and do that, please.
You want, if you didn't see it, can I run back it very quickly just to
You
show
can
you?
do anything you want. You're in control.
Okay.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay, that's what that's okay.
Sorry.
Are you watching, seeing it now, Nori?
No, not yet.
No, we are not yet seeing anything. We are not yet. No. That's a negative, Jim. We are not seeing your screen share.
Yeah.
Yeah. You need to go ahead and do it on your end. You need to push that green button that says screen share on your end.
Okay. In
bottom of your screen, there's going to be toward the left-hand side a green button that says screen share.
Okay.
There we go. Now we're seeing it.
Okay. I apologize. That's too bad. Okay. Anyway, I'll run through just very quickly, okay, to catch up. There's as I pointed out, there are all kinds of things happened in the first few weeks of October. The things I'll talk about today are the cartels and the violence, and that's about where we've ended off. If there's time at the end here, I'll give a very brief overview of the final three things here and answer questions if people have them. As I pointed out in the cartels, it's much more about drug production. It's about control of resources. The U.S. has identified the following cartels. Okay, the two main one being the cartel de Jalisco and Nueva Generación. Okay, and the U.S. Congressional Research Services keeps updates on which cartels are operating and which states they're competing in. And I tried to present an overview of the differences between the Sinaloa cartel, which is very much a horizontal organization that forms cooperative arrangements with all kinds of different groups. They are not a top-down. The people at the middle are very much in control, and of course they make the most money. But other groups, of course, benefit and they work with each other where necessary. The Cartel de Jalisco, Nueva Generación, is very much a top-down organization. The Cartel de Santa Rosa de Lima was active in the state of Guanajuato and became the basic enemy, the target of the Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación. And the war between them, the battles between them, led to a great deal of violence. Okay, and then, of course, where we finally clued in that I wasn't showing you the graphics was when I talked about the violence. So as I said, the 6 most violent states in Mexico last year that had half the homicides were Michoacan, Guanajuato, Mexico State, Baja California, Jalisco, and Sonora. Okay, about 18,000 homicides in those states. The 2 of the most violent states of the top 10 are located in the state of Guanajuato, León, and Celaya. And where Nori kicked in and told me that it was not, these graphics weren't being seen, is when I got into this graphic here of the trends over time. And there are about 300 homicides this year so far. Sorry, in September. So that's going to translate into about considerably more. Okay, somebody else is controlling my screen here. Okay. Okay. I am losing control of my own screen. Okay. I tapped into the latest data. Okay, on in Guanajuato, it said there were 346 people killed during September. Okay, but one of the things that I'd like to point out, I guess by way of reassurance, is that it still continues to be cities outside of San Miguel de Allende that are the most violent. Okay. Leon and Celaya continue to be violent, and Guanajuato itself, San Miguel de Allende itself, is is relatively safe. Okay, so anyway, I hope all of that didn't end up being too confusing, but that's kind of a picture of the cartels and of the violence in the state of Guanajuato. We just mention a couple of other things here. Okay. Okay. In Mexico, the control of security has been handed over like 100% to the military. And there's a cartoon here that kind of represents it down on the bottom, where you've got two individuals talking about, one critic saying, "Don't you think it's really bad that, we're giving so much power to the military?" And the other person is saying, "No, don't be so dramatic. I mean, we've got to do something about the violence." And meanwhile, the power of the military gets larger and larger, and it's being handed over to the military by President López Obrador. And the concern from citizens is basically that the army is also involved in things like the disappearance and killing of students at Ayotzinapa, the 43, and that's been suppressed. And of course, the memory in Mexico, just let me forget that point for a minute here. The discussion of the militarization has dominated the press over the past month or so. And these are the issues of Proceso that have dedicated long articles to the increasing power of the military. And in Mexico, of course, there's a very long memory going back to 1968 and the suppression. So the critics of the militarization in Mexico are people who remember what happened in the suppression of students going back to 1968. And many of us, we Anglos, we Güeros, don't really appreciate how deeply ingrained that distrust of the military is back in those times. And believe me, it is very deeply felt by anybody who was a student or a member of the anti-war movement or a member of any kind of social group. So anyway, the militarization of Mexico has increased, and if people have questions about that, I can try to talk about it.
Here's what we'd like to do, Jim. Here's what we'd like to do. In fairness to all involved, as good Rotarians, we do have a room full. We still have people on chat and on Zoom. What we need to do is let everyone know that if they want to leave now or get off now, our meeting is supposed to end at 10:30. We know that this is a very interesting topic for everyone. And so those that wish to stay, and if you will do us the great favor, Jim, we're happy to stay.
Sure.
But I do need to let people know.
Okay, yeah, that's what I had understood. I realized I had gone on. But let me just point out something that people might find interesting. One of the things that's also happened in Mexico, I'll be very happy to stay to answer the question, but
thank you.
One of the things that people might be interested in is the debate over what's called preventive imprisonment. In Mexico, if you are arrested, you can be held on charge, held without having charges laid before you. And the international courts have criticized Mexico for this policy that was put in place in 2006 as a way of trying to control cartels, but it's led to abuses. And in particular, there's a Netflix video that has that anybody can see and might want to take a look at that. Discusses this whole issue. It's called the kidnapping affair, the Florence Cassés kidnapping scandal, the Florence Cassés affair. And this video is a 5-part video that talks about a French woman who was accused of kidnapping with very little evidence, okay, along with her Mexican boyfriend. And the French government finally intervened to get her out of prison because she had never been charged formally. Her boyfriend is still in prison after 15 years, and he's never been brought to charges. So this all happens under something called preventive imprisonment. And the Mexican Supreme Court took a look at whether, because of pressure from international human rights groups, the unfairness of this and the violation of human rights, and the Mexican Supreme Court eventually voted to keep it in place. So if people want to know more about that, they can look at this particular video. Okay, and if I can get out of here again. Okay, this final thing, of course, the Sedena hack. The military had its servers hacked by a group called the Guacamaya group. If somebody wants to write me, I can send them a link on Twitter. And this particular person on Twitter, her name is Isabella Gonzalez, went through and she gave a summary of all the things that have been revealed about the military involvement, military corruption, the number of governors who've been involved in corruption. Okay, and I think Nori and Diego, at that point, I should probably stop talking and turn the screen back over to you. And if people have questions or want me to go back and clarify any of the things that were confusing in the as a result of not being able to see the screen, I'll try to answer them, and we'll see where the discussion goes if people still want to participate.
Susan?
So if you had a magic wand and if you were president of Mexico, what would you do as a drug policy? What do you think the ideal drug policy should be to try to eliminate the dominance of the cartels in Mexico? Colombia did it somehow. Colombia used to be the most dangerous spot on the planet, and now tourists go there all the time, and it's a beautiful country to visit, and the violence is diminished. How did they do it? And what do you think we should do in Mexico to reduce the dominance of cartels? What would your magic wand be?
I don't have a magic wand, and Listen, I mean, Mexico is in serious trouble with this, and whatever happens will not happen overnight. It'll take a long time. There is not one academic I know, or not one expert on security I know, who believes that the control of cartels can happen by turning the power over to the military. Okay, the magic wand lies in strengthening all of Mexico's institutions. Okay, I mean all of them, not just the police forces, which are in most cases incredibly corrupt themselves. But I mean, the education, all education of I mean, any institution, education on upward. Now, corruption is at the heart of all of this. I mean, there clearly are people at all levels of government and all levels of the military, all levels of police, all levels of business, who are profiting off of the money that's generated by cartels. And yet the policy of under the fourth transformation has not been to strengthen Mexico's institutions. In fact, it's been to weaken almost all of them. And the military is now in control of almost all institutions that control the input and export of importation and exportation of commodities into Mexico. Last week, the president just turned over the control of the aduana to military generals. And, meanwhile, other institutions have been weakened and, and diminished with the lack of funding and the lack of support, or just the lack of commitment to try to do things to strengthen them. And, I know that's not an answer, but I mean, the answer lies in strengthening all institutions and eliminating corruption. I mean, that's obviously a lot easier said than done, but that's the magic answer, unfortunately.
We have one other question here. Give me a second.
I think for Mexicans is indeed, for Mexicans is indeed a tragedy what President López Obrador has done. Before the decision was made in the Senate to do it, there was a journalist that asked the president very concrete questions, because among the leaked documents, it was clearly a document that the government has been spying and has been using a lot of software to spy on journalists and people with other ideas than the government. And that has been evident because we have been the country with the most deaths of journalists in several years, particularly this year. It's surprising that President López Obrador has done very little from the beginning, from his position of abrazos, not balazos, to do something against the cartels. But anyway, I think the greatest danger that we feel as Mexicans is that once you give the power to the military, it's very, very, very hard to get it back. And that's the tragedy, biggest tragedy.
We have a follow-up question from Susan Page.
Well, I was just going to ask, AMLO said that his big goal was he was going to end corruption. Has he made any progress toward that?
I mean, I haven't seen any. I mean, many of you may know that there is a book that's just been released that's going to obviously generate a lot of controversy, and the book that the title, somebody there may know the exact title, but is just coming out now, and basically it accused AMLO himself of being corrupt and taking bribes during all the time, and that he, has been a politician, and he's been targeted himself. The book, many people have reacted to the book by pointing out, by saying, there's no facts here. This is just an opinion. But when you look at, I mentioned earlier that the Secretary of the Economy, her name is Tatiana Cloutier, resigned from cabinet. Tatiana Cloutier is a politician, the daughter of a very famous politician from Sinaloa. And she joined AMLO's team right at the very beginning of the election, and was his spokesperson, and devised his strategy to attract people from the middle of the political spectrum. She was very successful. Anyway, she just resigned, and the interpretation of her resignation is that she could not work with people in the cabinet who in fact have been involved in corruption in Mexico going back to the days of Operation Condor. Okay, the Attorney General. Okay, she specifically had a major disagreement with the Attorney General Gertz, and anyway, there are people who feel that within AMLO's cabinet, there are people who still have these close ties to narcos and are profiting. And I'm, as an outsider, I obviously don't have evidence of that, but my view as an outsider and the view of the people that I trust is that no, he hasn't done very much to eliminate corruption. In fact, it's still continuing. The difficulty is that I clearly am an outsider, and I can observe what's going on from outside. And the way I look at it, and is as a sociologist who's been trained to look at how crime is controlled. And I don't see any of the things that other states, like you mentioned, Colombia, or in particular Portugal is a very good example, have done to try to get organized crime under control. In fact, all the things that have been done are exactly the opposite to what most academic criminologists and strategy experts would say should be done. Corruption still exists. The airport, and the cancellation of the airport and moving it, and turning it over to the military, the Tren Maya. Anyway, I don't know what to say more than that.
We've got another question for you.
Right.
Can you hear?
Go ahead.
All right.
Yeah.
All of us who have family still in the U.S. think that those of us who live here are crazy for living here with the violence. But is there any way to tease out in the statistics that you shared with us what are collateral damage versus, cartel, warfare among themselves? Is there very high rates of collateral damage or not?
No, first of all, it's very difficult to tease it out as a statistic. And when there is collateral damage, of course, it gets picked up by the foreign press in particular. And it tends to be exaggerated because that one case, has happened, and they've got an example of it, and it rebounds around the media. But the statistics itself, which are difficult to tease out and look at in very specific terms, aren't showing a lot of collateral damage among foreigners in particular. In places like Leon or Celaya, or obviously there are going to be people who are not involved who get caught up in it. The execution of the attack on the mayor's office in Guerrero, Toto Lampara, I forgot the name of the city, is there are 20 people killed, and the target was the mayor, but the other people who were involved working at City Hall, I'm sure, only a couple of them were directly involved in any kind of cartel or criminal, crime organization directly. But I mean, as far as like foreigners go, well, first of all, San Miguel's a safe place. Next month, I'm going to Culiacan for a conference. I am not afraid to go there. I don't expect that I would be the target of anything. I don't expect anybody I know would be the target of anything. And yet the cartels are all around and the violence is all around. And
so Jim, as you can see from this, line of questions, of course, we all have a great interest. We live here. We're here. There's many people in the room that still, have many questions. And I think this leaves us with the fact that you will just have to come down here and visit us and do a longer presentation in a bigger room with more people that have a lot of interest, because we could sit here probably for hours and talk about this. And I do want to thank you on behalf of Rotary. You're always extremely interesting to listen to. How can people know more, and what should this room be making a note of?
Did you have to mention that I wrote
we're
a
hoping
book?
To buy it today.
Well, at University of Arizona Press, you can get it. It's available as an ebook. That's the easiest.
As an ebook.
Yeah, it's University of Arizona Press. If you go to the site and type in my name, the book I did is available as an ebook as well as a paperback and a hardback. But there's another book too that people might be interested in, and it's called the Dope, D-O-P-E, by Benjamin Smith, and he's a historian, and he wrote a very thorough academic book of the history of cartels in Mexico, without throwing any academic references into it. And but it really is a worthwhile book to get, and if you want to look at it, and more academic kind of detail, my book is one that you can pick up. It's available online. There are a lot of Spanish language ones coming out, and I wish that many of them would eventually get translated. If you can read, go online. I mean, maybe everybody can go online, but if you go to a site called animalpolitico.com, they're providing complete up-to-date information about what's going on in Mexico, and it has a translation function. So even if you're not thoroughly competent in Spanish, you can click that little button that translates it, and it does a pretty good job of updating people.
Well, excellent. Well, all this information will be on the Rotary site. So please visit our website, and the name of Jim's book and everything else will be there. And again, Jim, this is an open invitation. Please come to San Miguel.
Okay.
Thank you so very much on behalf of all of us here.
Okay.
I have to go because I have to be at the mayor's presentation on the municipality's report. So if anybody else wants Mike, you are welcome.
I'm very happy to see a beautiful work of folk art behind you, a beautiful tree of life from Acatlan, Puebla. Congratulations on supporting the folk artists of Mexico.
This is